Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Troy Clayton, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Sergeant John Lyons. The first Wednesday of September each year marks Battle for Australia Day. After Japan entered the war in December 1941, a generation of Australians left their homes to work or serve in the defence of their nation. Late 1941 and early 1942 was a dramatic time for Australia as Japanese forces moved swiftly southward through the Pacific. On the 15th of February 1942, Singapore fell to the Japanese and prompted Australia's Prime Minister, John Curtin, to declare that the battle for Australia had begun. Thousands of Australians were engaged in actions against Japanese forces, including those who served to defend the Australian mainland against attacks. Battle for Australia Day is a day for us to recognise those who served in the defence of the Australian mainland and in land, air and sea battles in the Coral Sea, Papua and New Guinea. These actions stopped the Japanese southward advance. Some 22,000 Australians became prisoners of the Japanese during the war, of whom some 8,000 lives were lost. This evening, we remember all those who died during the Battle for Australia and whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour and the survivors who returned home. This evening, we are honoured to welcome Second World War veteran Mr. Les Cook. Les enlisted with his father Ernest into the army in 1940. To be able to enlist, both lied about their ages. Ernest put his age down by 4 years, and Les put his up by 4. Les was in fact just 17 years of age on enlistment. Les served with the 2nd 14th Battalion in North Africa, Greece, Crete, Syria, and in the Pacific, including Kokoda. He also served as part of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan. Les, we thank you for your service and for joining us here this evening. We are also honoured to acknowledge Vice Admiral Ma Do-no, President of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defence Force College and the accompanying delegation, and Air Vice Marshal Roxley McKinnon, retired, Chair of the Battle for Australia, Commemorative National Council and the accompanying delegation. We also warmly welcome the delegation from the Royal Australian Air Force, representing the Air Combat Systems Programs Office. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We also acknowledge the members of the RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching this ceremony broadcast across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of St Bridget's Catholic Primary School, Canberra, New South Wales. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Thank you. You may be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Frederick William Cheesewright. Frederick Cheesewright was born on the 17th of August 1915 in Midland Junction, Western Australia. His parents, Frederick Sr. and Maud, had immigrated to Australia from England before marrying in 1913. Frederick was the oldest child of a large family that lived in Subiaco, where Frederick went on to work as a furnace hand and enameller. He was also an amateur boxer, fighting in some high-profile bouts in the lightweight class. Frederick Cheesewright enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 30th of May 1940. Allocated to the recently raised 2nd 16th Battalion, he began basic training in Northern Camp. After pre-embarkation leave in September, in October, Private Cheesewright and his battalion embarked at Fremantle. After a brief stop in India, they arrived in Egypt and moved straight to Palestine to complete training. The 2nd 16th's first assignment was to bolster defences against an expected German attack along the Egypt-Libya frontier. Having occupied positions at Martin Bagush and Merza Matruh through April and May 1941, the men returned to Palestine in preparation for the invasion of Syria and Lebanon. Beginning in the early June, the 2nd 16th Battalion's experience of the Syria and Lebanon campaign involved difficult and costly actions against well-entrenched Vichy French troops, with major battles including crossing the Litani River, the unsuccessful attempt to capture Sidon, and the seizure of El Outika Ridge as part of the Damour. After the armistice of 12th July, the battalion remained in Lebanon as part of the Allied garrison force. Cheesewright was evacuated suffering from malaria in July, but returned to duty in August. Despite some further medical problems in September, he was soon fit for duty. After sailing from Egypt in the late January 1942, over 350 members of the battalion absented themselves without leave when their transport called briefly at Fremantle. Cheesewright, however, was with those who disembarked at Adelaide on the 25th of March 1942. His stay in Australia was to be relatively brief, however. In mid-August, he and the 2nd 16th Battalion arrived at Port Moresby. By the end of the month, they were in action against the Japanese at Ubari on the Kokoda Trail. Cheesewright was promoted to acting corporal of the 2nd on the 2nd of September 1942, as his battalion was forced to withdraw, fighting a series of desperate actions back along the trail, including having to fight out of a Japanese encirclement at Mission Ridge. The ordeal on the Kokoda Trail ended with his brief relief at Imta Ridge on the 16th of September. By this time, however, the battalion was so weak that it had been amalgamated with the 2nd 14th to form a composite battalion. Among the dead was Corporal Frederick Cheesewright, who had been killed in action on the 4th of September 1942. He was 27 years old. His remains were buried at Efoggy in mid-October, by which time they could only be identified by the ID disc taken from his remains. His grave was marked with a rough wooden cross. Later reburied at Templeton's Crossing War Cemetery. After the war, they were buried in Port Moresby, Bomana War Cemetery, where they lie today under the inscription, "His duty nobly done, mourned by his family." His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my left, amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Frederick William Cheesewright, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub of Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director and staff, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorials Development Project. And we wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.